Another breaking story is Boris Johnson, this time in the United Kingdom, that is, where Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is fighting for political survival after two of his top ministers attacked his leadership and then resigned. Chancellor Rishi Sunak and Health Secretary Sajid Javid quit within 10 minutes of each other, followed by a flurry of junior ministers and aides. Neither Mr. Javid nor Mr. Sunak have publicly spoken since standing down, but their resignation letters yesterday night were highly critical of the Prime Minister. Mr. Javid had warned the leadership was not acting in the national interest, while Mr. Sunak said the public expected government to be conducted properly, competently, and seriously. Bim Afolabi, who quit as vice chair of the Conservative Party live on TV, said Downing Street's handling of the Chris Pincher affair had been really appalling, and he could no longer defend that sort of behavior. And as expected, the resignations of top UK ministers and the plight of the Prime Minister have been dominating all the newspaper headlines this morning. A great number of lawmakers in his ruling Conservative Party have said the game is up for Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson's leadership has been mired in scandals and missteps over the last few months, with the Prime Minister fined by police for breaking COVID-19 lockdown rules, and a damning report published about the behavior of officials at his Downing Street office who breached lockdown rules. And the leader of Britain's opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, says he will welcome a snap election and that the country needed a change of government after Mr. Johnson lost two of his key ministers who quit yesterday. Asked by a reporter if he would support a national election if one was called in the next 2 weeks, Mr. Starmer said, yes, we need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government at this time.
We need a fresh start for Britain. We need a change of government, and this government is collapsing. The Tory party is corrupted, and changing one man at the top of the Tory party won't make any difference. It won't fix the problems. Let's have a fresh start for Britain. Let's have a real change of government. And Tory cabinet ministers have been cheerleaders for Johnson throughout this sorry saga. They backed him when he broke the law. They backed him when he lied. They backed him when he mocked the sacrifices of the British people. So they have been complicit as he has disgraced his office and let down his country. And frankly, if they had a shred of integrity, they would have gone months ago.
I think that, cabinet members that have suddenly found a conscience, that's all well and good, but I think the rest of the cabinet need to go now and need to do the right thing by the British public. It's pretty obvious that Boris Johnson's not fit to be Prime Minister, and I'm glad that some of the cabinet are starting to grow a backbone and realise that.
All right, then let's see if we can talk to our correspondent in the British capital, Juliana Olayinka. Juliana, good morning to you. This, for those who've been watching, probably did not come as a surprise, but what are you learning now this morning? I know the Prime Minister is expected to answer questions in Parliament this morning.
Good morning, Laddie. Well, it's been an extraordinary 24 hours, and there are so many layers to the political scandal engulfing SW1 at the moment that, forgive me if I chop and change between contexts, because there's just so much of it. I think you pretty much outlined what shocked everybody last night, and that was the resignation of two of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's most senior ministers, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary. This was within 10 minutes of each other, and it started with a bombshell tweet from Sajid Javid. And as you quite rightly said, both were ripping into his character and the Conservative Party, and they just didn't feel as if they could stand by the Prime Minister anymore. Lots of ministers were on resignation watch last night. One in particular, Nadine Zahari. Now, he was once an Iraqi Iraqi a migrant who came to this country at the age of 10 speaking no English, rose up the ranks to become the vaccine minister at a time when the country was really deep in the COVID crisis. He then went on to become the education secretary, and at the 11th hour last night we heard that he has now become the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Apparently it was a toss-up between himself and Liz Truss, who is the Foreign Secretary, but Aziz Zahawi told the Prime Minister that I will be resigning if you do not give me this post, and he has got this post. And now some people do believe that because of this new post, he may indeed keep the Prime Minister in number 10 for at least a couple of days. We've got to see what happens at PMQs today. It is going to be a showdown, really embarrassing day for the Prime Minister, because of course last month 44% of his own MPs voted that they had no confidence in him. Now two of his most staunch allies have resigned, and he is pretty much on the ropes. We heard just now that track from Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour opposition party, and I think lots of people do agree with him. The government is collapsing around Boris Johnson, and the fact that just when you want to be coming out of COVID and just when you are in the middle of the worst inflation crisis in a generation, that your two key ministers resign just doesn't speak well for you.
Now, I must, of course, ask that it's not just within Britain that people will be looking at all of this. One group, one country that will be looking very, very worried at this point will be the Ukrainians, who have been staunchly supported by Britain all through the war situation, and they'll be watching all of this very closely. But let's talk about the possibility of a snap election. There are those who have overnight already said that there should be a snap election within the next 2 weeks, that it isn't enough for Mr. Johnson to step down. Plus, we have heard this several times in the last weeks and months, that he was on the ropes only for him to recover. So there are those who will ask, why should this be different?
There are those that will ask, why should this be different? But let's talk about Ukraine first. You're absolutely right. Of course, Volodymyr Zelensky has a key ally in Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's visited Ukraine, Kyiv, twice now. He wants to believe that he is the leader of the Western Front against Vladimir Putin, though I think you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody in France, Germany, Italy or America that say they're taking, their lead from Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But, he has been a key ally, very vocal. Is that necessarily going to change if Prime Minister Boris Johnson is ousted? I don't think so. If you ever get to watch PMQs, and I would say to everybody, do try and tune in today at 12 o'clock. You can watch it on the PMQs YouTube feed. I think people would say that it's a cross-party effort. Most, I would say 99% of people, ministers that sit within the Palace of Westminster would be doing exactly what Boris Johnson is doing when it comes to his fight against Vladimir Putin and being a close ally to Volodymyr Zelensky. So no matter what happens, that won't change. Will there be a snap general election? Well, that may work in the favour of the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, because, of course, a couple of weeks ago, when the Prime Minister was in Rwanda attending Chogum, those two key by-elections were lost. They were two key Conservative seats, one on the Red Wall, which was a loss to the Labour Party, and another in a pretty safe seat in the southeast of England. That was lost. It was in the southwest of England, I apologise. That was a loss to the Liberal Democrats. So if there was an election now, would the British public turn their back on Prime Minister Boris Johnson? You have to look at the polls, and there was a poll very late last night from YouGov, and it did show that 69% of the British public do want Prime Minister Boris Johnson to resign. That's the highest percentage of resignation that he has had from the British public since he took office. A lot of people have been talking about that 2019 80-seat majority, something the Conservative Party haven't had since the late Margaret Thatcher was in office. But did people really know Boris Johnson then? I think people did obviously sort of have an affinity towards him when he was the chief cheeky chappy, jolly mayor of London. But I don't think they realised the extent of how much people disliked him, how much people were accusing him of lying. And they've seen that. They saw the revelations in the Sue Gray report. They've seen how he's handled, you know, standards in public life. We haven't even spoken about Chris Pincher, a deputy chief whip, who the Prime Minister decided to give a promotion when he knew there were long-standing allegations against him regarding sexual harassment. There are so many issues that dog the Prime Minister. He is trying to stay on. If you listen to any of his biographers or close allies that have been doing their rounds on British media, they say he is not a man to quit. So he would have to be dragged out of there kicking and screaming, which is why we are expecting a lot of senior MPs to be knocking on the door of Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, to say the rules need to be changed. He needs to be out. Nobody has any confidence in him anymore.
Thank you so much, Juliana, for the context provided. Of course, we'll be in touch with you throughout the course of the day as this story develops. But for now, thanks.